run, and now like Longmont, Watkins out east, and someplace down south near the Springs.
How would you like your job?
So here's what I learned from my friend. So the camel milking. Can I put this here?
Yeah.
All right. So evidently camels can kick in multiple directions. So you have to, when you bring them into the milking stall, you have to strap down all four legs.
Really?
Really. This is, which is, somebody looked it up, and like 4 quarts of camel's milk was like 40, or 3 quarts of camel's milk was $40.
So that's what JT's getting for his birthday.
Okay. He's getting camel's milk?
Yeah, he said, well, I want some camel's milk.
Okay.
And I said, when's his birthday?
Was,
He said, April. I
there we
said,
go.
well, there's the birthday
Perfect.
present.
And the Camel Dairy here in Longmont offers, well, here's what I think, they don't really want tours, because they will give a tour, but they start at $500 an hour.
So I will add,
No, honey.
our old neighbor that we used to walk our dog all the time,
Yeah,
he would take our dog up to visit the camels.
okay.
Our dog loved to go visit the camels.
Okay. So,
Oh, I'm just imagining, because cow, you put that clamp on the back, that's it.
yeah,
But you got.
I'm thinking that camels are much more labor intensive.
And they spit at you.
Yes.
Well, so here's the other thing I learned about camels, not from firsthand experience. Some camels are nice, some camels are nasty. So some camels will be like, like put their head on your, like, ooh, and other camels are like, spit, kick, bite. Yeah.
They have more than one set of eyelashes.
Okay. I did not know that.
To help filter out the scent.
Okay. I knew they had really long eyelashes, but more than one set. Okay.
And they make tents out of camel hair.
That makes sense. So, all right, folks. Neighboring 101, stuff that doesn't fit in the sermon. And we'll get started here. I think neighborhoods are designed now, and I'm talking from my experience, which is single family dwellings and a few townhomes. It works whether you're in an apartment, a trailer park. Basically, God in his infinite wisdom constantly puts his people next to other people. That's just the way God works. Now, we can say, God, that's stupid. And I have had friends say that, and I've also, historically, people have said, that's stupid. Here's what I mean by that. On my scale of how people become believers, where we start off blind, dead, and an enemy of God, and we end up becoming a disciple of Jesus like St. Paul. So 0 to 100. Along the way, God always uses people to move us each step of the way. Don't get me wrong. Randomly, occasionally, someone will pick up Gideon's Bible and have a moment and give their life to Jesus and be changed. 2 things about that still say people. One, the Gideons is a person-based organization that put those Bibles there. And 2, the Gideon Bible, if you've ever read now that you've read this, giving your life to Jesus, get yourself in connection with a group of people, because you're going to need fellow Christians to grow as a disciple. So there have been Christians who have always said, if I could just avoid the world and leave. There have been a monastic movement. It's been around since 400 AD that just said the world is a cesspit. We're moving out by ourselves so we can avoid being contaminated by the world. And God in his wisdom said those folks are going to have some special jobs. They're going to make copies of the scriptures. They're going to write stuff down. They're going to do that kind of work. But even there, after the Desert Fathers, people lived in community. So when I lived in Lafayette, Louisiana, we had a set of Carmelite nuns that were living monastically. So they had a sealed convent, And they had like, one priest once a month would come in to hear confessions. But other than that, things got delivered. They were a self-contained community. Where I hear this in the Missouri Synod is where people have tried to say, oh, you know what God really likes? God really likes small town life. Now it makes sense because that's where most of our congregations are. But I would have friends, and particularly friends' wives, who would be like moving into Milwaukee and Central City or moving into St. Louis, and they'd be like, there are way too many people here. I cannot, dear God, get me through these years so my husband can get his MDiv and we can move back to God's country, which is a small town in Iowa, Nebraska, someplace where people are people and we don't have all these strangers around us. So we were, if you remember Jeffrey Dahmer, we were a few blocks from his old neighborhood on the old campus in Milwaukee. And you could always tell the new kids that came from a small town because we were also on a major thoroughfare. So ambulances were coming through all the time for a hospital. And you could see the kids that had come from like a town of 500 in northern Wisconsin, they'd be going, oh, an ambulance, I hope everybody's all right. And you're going, by the second month, kid, you're just, oh, it's an ambulance. Wait, don't try to cross the street, it's an ambulance, because they're all the time. Okay, so differences in life. But God in his wisdom always puts us near other people. Some of them are our fellow believers, and that's its own set of challenges. And some of them are people who do not yet know Jesus and God's grace. Some neighborhoods are more homogeneous than others. I had some neighbors, Judy and I were walking one of the dogs and started chatting with them and, doing what do you do? I'm a pastor. Oh, what kind of pastor? I'm a Lutheran pastor. What kind of Lutheran pastor? Said, I'm in the Missouri Synod. Oh, then you're all right. Her dad had been a super conservative Baptist pastor here in town. No, I don't remember her maiden name. And so they were very concerned. So when they retired, they rented an RV and they drove around until they found a conservative enough community, and they moved into a place in Florida called like the Glades or something. And it's like when they post their pictures on Facebook, it is like Trump banners everywhere, and they are happy. They were looking for a homogeneous neighborhood. But most neighborhoods, even pretty homogeneous ones, have people that have differences. I speak from experience. I've been on an HOA board. Well, I was before I moved here. Then I took a 10-year break, and now I've been 15 years on our HOA board. I guarantee you there are differences between people even when we're in the same basic socioeconomic demographic. Congregations, people like you and me gathered together, we tend to devolve towards homogeneity unless we make an intentional step to say, how can we be more inclusive? How can we make sure that we're not just a bunch of old people or a bunch of young people or a bunch of middle-class folks or upper middle-class folks or poor folks. And one of the geniuses of the early church, I think, was they ended up in cities and they tended to draw people from all different ranks of Roman culture. So if you think about the church in Philippi, the Philippian congregation, who was the woman that was the mastermind of that? Lydia. Lydia was a dealer in purple cloth, which meant that she worked with high-end fashion people. This was not somebody who was like, she had money. And in fact, what she says is to Paul, after, they've had the experience at the riverbank there is, come to my house and we're going to do church there. And she opens her house to the community. Now we know that the Philippian congregations had slaves in it, that it had free people in it. So really grinding level of poverty, daily labor type folks. If you've ever seen the people holding the traffic sign, that kind of labor of lever. And then you had people like Lydia. If you go to Rome, you can find a couple of very, very old churches. You can find them because they're 20 feet below street level. And they used to be an individual's dwelling of somebody from the senatorial class. And they became Christians and they opened their house. And then there was this mix of people from all stratas of life. And it was just the way God caused the church to work. But even the most homogeneous group, we're going to have differences. So, how can you do relationships despite differences? 93% of the people say our current state of dividedness in our nation is not good. And many folks will blame the internet. The elders are reading this book right now by Dr. Chad Lakes, a seminary professor, and I have 2 extra copies if anybody wants to join the elders in reading it. And he talks about what disciples people in chapter 3 or 4, I forget which. And he says, many of us these days, we are discipled by, in our interaction with people, by how people interact with each other online. And we have started to see that as the way, I'm not going to say he's wrong. He's a full PhD. I'm a parish pastor. So we can blame the internet and say, yeah, it's the internet's fault. Or we can say the internet is simply reflecting who we already were. Could be either way. But anyhow, how do we do this? And we tend to fall into the, I grabbed one from each side. So Ann Coulter, if you are a conservative, you may have read Ann Coulter. I remember this book, How to Talk to a Liberal If You Must. You know, like, just please keep them at arm's length. And James Carville from the left, we're right and they're wrong. Okay, and it's sort of like there's us and there's them. And that's kind of the way a lot of things are working in American culture. So, features of that division is a willingness to engage with so this is where you run into, if you work and listen carefully to people who think very differently than you do, and sometimes we'll even say, that's a pretty good idea. You can get excoriated by people further that are more devout on your side. So how many of you have heard the term rhino, Republican in name only? Okay, so somebody that behaves the way the Congress and Senate used to, which was, we'll listen, you give something, we give something, and together we make and the American people. And now it's like, no, that's rhino behavior. I do not know how the Democrats do that one. I'm not saying they don't, I'm just saying I don't know it. But I've seen the behavior, right? You know, because I've been that person. I'm like, well, you know, there's something to be said for this and this and this. And it's like, are you sure, John? You know, we'll kind of move away from you there. And, you know, so this willingness to say, how do I engage? How do I just listen and learn? I had both a vacuum cleaner and a dishwasher go down yesterday, so my study is not as polished as I'd like. The next slide's supposed to be a bar graph. And it's a bar graph that has 4 lines on it. The first line has 70. The next one has 72 or 74, I forget which. The next one has 160, and the one at the very bottom has 240. And the top one is the number of Americans who voted for Kamala Harris, and she got about 70 million votes. Donald Trump got about 72 or 74 million votes, I forget which. The difference is, when you see it in context, is not that great. 160 some odd million is the number of registered voters there are in America. And then 240 is the number of people who are the appropriate age and are citizens and could vote if they bothered to register. There is that difference at the top, but there's a whole bunch of people there at the bottom. And to say, I'm interested in talking to everybody, you know, there will be people who will sort of distance themselves from you because you're not pure enough anymore. And for many people, the only hope how will America survive? My side has to win, and the other side has to suffer ignominious defeat. And then, we joked in confirmation class. I used to think it was a joke, and we said, when you pray in the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, and I gave them, 3 or 4 answers on a bullet point, what does it mean? And the first one was that, all Democrats would become Republicans. And then the next one was that all Republicans would become Democrats. The third one was that, I wanted to throw something out there, that everybody became a libertarian. And then the fourth one was the quote from the Catechism. I made it easy, okay? Until somebody was like, well, I kind of like A, I gotta tell you. So, that's what winning looks like, is when my side's in charge. And then here comes the challenging bit to neighboring. What happens when I'm emotionally invested in someone who's from the other side? Or even, that's where Thanksgiving gets fraught for people. And it's like, shoot, we really can't uninvite Uncle Ned. But what's he going to come up with this year? And how do we do it? So, and then there's various, you can try conversion attempts. A couple more slides in, I've got a different plan. So just hold that idea. But basically, Uncle Ned is probably not going to be persuaded between, salad course and dessert. So why are divisions so popular? First off, it just relieves tension. I mean, especially true if you don't have tools for listening and learning and cooperating with people. It's like, they're different. I don't want to have anything to do with them. These were the Sem wives that I would run into who were like, oh, I can't wait to get out of St. Louis. I can't wait to get out of Milwaukee. I can't wait till God puts us back where I understand people, because this big city life doesn't fit for me. Now, in some ways, I get that. That's just a cultural thing. But in other ways, it was like, so where I went too far was I love her dearly, but she was like, I do not see how someone can be a Christian in St. Louis. It's just, because it's much easier to be a Christian in Iowa. And that's where she was from. She was like, just life is easier there. Because there was less tension, because everybody was the same, and she understood how all the rules worked. Divisions are popular because it keeps me from being tempted to think or act differently, and I can conform to the community. Has anybody heard of the tall poppy syndrome? It's a sociological idea, that a commentator who born and raised in the Missouri Synod says, we suffer from the tall poppy syndrome. We came out of small European villages where, in order for the village to survive, everybody had to kind of get along. And if somebody kind of lifted themselves up and said, I am going to go do this thing, it was the tall poppy, and the tall poppy got its head lopped off, because we need to keep peace. And if some people are pushing and just, and he said, so, think of the last time that if somebody said, name the best preacher in the Missouri Synod, you maybe go, oh, the Lutheran Hour guy, maybe, but most part you go, we don't produce superstar pastors. We don't produce superstar preachers. We don't produce superstar anything, because we fear the tall poppy syndrome, that if somebody says, I'm going to become great at this, there's 100 people trying to pull them down to go, no. I used to, when I was a circuit visitor or circuit counselor at the time, so I was the flunky from Synod that would come and help congregations when they were like they needed to bring in the new pastor, and then I'd visit with the new pastors, and I'd lead the meetings of the circuits of the pastors, and you'd have people going like, I really hate, Pastor so-and-so who's been, dead for 10 years. Why? Because everybody keeps talking about what a great pastor he was. I'm like, he was a pretty good pastor, but it's like, yeah, but I have to compete with that. And I'm like, yes, you do. You could step up your game. I'm not so sure. And we talked about this earlier. If I go along with the division, I can prove how devout I am to the correct way that me and my people think. So, but there is, on the other hand, a cost to divisions. this is the one that scares me the most. If you ever get me started on this, and I will get off my soapbox in a minute, we end up in echo chambers and we listen to people who think like we do, feel like we do, and rather than having our thinking challenged and sharpened, we end up in groupthink and we say something like, hey, let's invade Cuba. And the Bay of Pigs fiasco takes place because everybody that was there, or so that was a Democrat one. Let me pick on a Republican one. Was it Haldeman? Who was the guy that was in charge of the plumbers that wanted to get into the White House? Yeah, with Watergate. And this guy was like out there all the time. And it was like he was in meeting after meeting after meeting. And they finally went, okay, fine, break into the DNC and bug the phones. Just leave us alone. And obviously brought down Nixon's presidency because the group just finally said, yeah, we're going to live with this guy, instead of going, dude, you're crazy. But we end up with these huge blind spots that can create big problems. It was not until 1970, I can't remember the exact date, but our synodical president in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod was, I'm blanking on his name. I forgot. But we've had for, years, the President's Council on Women. And he, when he became synodical president, said, I think we should put some women on the President's Council on Women instead of just a bunch of pastors. And they went, you sure? So huge blind spots. And I think they picked Betty Duda from the LWML, and everybody went, oh, yeah, that's a good choice. But scripturally, iron sharpens iron, not iron just sits next to iron. But, we sharpen each other when we talk across our divisions. Here's the underlying anthropology. Since there have been enough people to form groups of people, we have been forming groups. And they're based on commonality or likeness. So those who are not like us are obviously the other group. Sociological terms we use are the in-group and the out-group. If you've read the Old Testament, I just finished, thanks be to God, Leviticus. So I'm now in Numbers. But 30 times in Leviticus, the phrase cut off. And we're not talking about like when you bring the ox to sacrifice it, cut off the such and such. We're talking about people being cut off. Okay? So Moses, God is saying, if this person behaves in this way, cut him off from the people. Remove him. He is not part of the in-group here. Sometimes take them outside of the camp and stone them. Sometimes fire from heaven falls down and consumes them. But God's trying to form and shape his people. So it's not bad to have an in-group and an out-group where there's a boundary and says, these are our behaviors. This is how we live. If you want to be part of us, these are how we live in this group. If you don't want to live that way, there are other groups. So when gay marriage got passed, what marriage equity, whatever they called it, there was this hue and cry, weeping and gnashing in the land of people going, oh no, gay couples are going to be coming into our churches and demanding to be married, and we have a scriptural understanding that says that's not right. And then our brothers and sisters in the Lutheran Church Canada were going, we've been dealing with this for 10 years, calm down. Just relax. Here's it. So this community, this is what we do. Now, I'm not talking about somebody who chose to, like Masterpiece Cake Bakers and, all that sort of thing. Yeah, those challenges are going on, because where is it just, I'm in the in-group, where is it prejudice? That's where people have to talk with each other and reason together. But so it's in-groups and out-groups are legitimate because they can actually have very positive aspects. First off, you get to be part of something bigger than yourself because there's so much one individual can do, but there is a multiplication effect when multiple people come together and they can create and accomplish far more than a single one can do. And two examples that I'm really familiar with where a shared ideology can make profound life change. I just got to pray over somebody and bless them on their 19-year coin for AA. And I remember life was like before they got sober. And I remember the stress that his family was under. And he just put together his 19th year day by day of sobriety. And I used to work in alcohol rehab when I was at seminary. And there's times where people are coming, I have a particular way of living that is addictive. I'm going to join this new group. I'm going to learn new ways. I'm going to make new friends. And it's going to make a profound difference in my life. And it does when you work the program. I also learned it in endurance athletics. If you are going to become a marathoner, it's really smart to have some friends who run marathons because they will support you and strengthen you. And I'm assuming with anything else, that's the same sort of thing. Because you're doing something that other people might look at and go, that's insane. Or I don't see the value in that. We used to have the Friday morning women's Bible study used to morph into the Friday morning women's quilting group. And it was a great thing. I mean, they made baby blankets for kids in the congregation, baby blankets that went out into the community. But it was, other people were like, you spent how much on that sewing machine? It was like, because I think a good quilting sewing machine is multiple thousands, right? Yeah, easy. And people are like, what's wrong with my singer? Trust me, you don't want to do this with a singer. You need sometimes a group that'll say, yeah, that's a good thing. So I'm not saying no groups whatsoever, no divisions, no saying this is how we behave in our group. But I think there's a biblical way forward, and I want to call it hospitality. And I gave you 3 examples, Old Testament, New Testament, and Gospel. In the Old Testament, Abraham practices hospitality. You remember the 3 visitors. And he quick tells his wife, get the good flour and make some bread. And he tells the servant, sacrifice one of the fatted calves. And gentlemen, please have a little water, sit down. And that's, and there's other times where Abraham receives hospitality. There's a famine, he goes off and hangs out with Abimelech for a while. Gets a little wonky with his wife, or he goes down to Egypt, again, gets a little wonky with his wife. But, there was this idea of we welcome. Hebrews 13, keep on loving one another, brothers and sisters. Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels. Samson's parents were visited by an angel. And, so they showed hospitality. And then finally, Jesus and the woman at the well. John 4, Jesus, and let's just go over it. What kind of a village was it where the woman lived? A Samaritan village. And so Jesus, and in John chapter 4, verse 4, Jesus says, we have to go this way. Good people would there was like Jewish folks up north, there was Jewish folks down around Jerusalem, there was Samaritans in between, and the really good folks would cross the Jordan River, go down and recross the Jordan River. And Jesus says, we're going due south. And I must do this, is the Greek. I have to do this. You remember the story. Jesus is hanging out at the well. Now, here's where Jesus has had some rub off on his disciples. They have gone into the village to buy food. So they are having interactions with Samaritans at the level of commerce and eating, which are pretty pharisaically forbidden. But they're like, yeah, okay, bread's bread. Get some grapes. And then the woman comes out, and she's coming at the wrong time of day because she's looked down on in her culture. And Jesus, from a place of humility, says, could I have a drink of water? And the woman's like, what? You can't do that. You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan, we're not supposed to associate. And then there's nuances within the conversation, but Jesus continually is trying to engage her. And if you remember how the story ends, she goes back into the village and says, I think this guy's the Messiah. And the villagers come out, they meet Jesus, and Jesus spends 2 or 3 days in the Samaritan village. And many people come to believe in him, I think is how John ends that chapter, or that section. Lost my point, sorry, it'll come to me. So this idea of practicing basic hospitality, of saying, how can I be accommodating to people around me who are different from me? And not saying you're not part of my in-group, but I understand that we can still be hospitable to each other. I think that makes a great deal of sense in American neighborhoods. Is, yes, I may not approve of the fact that, so my neighbors, Sam and Tammy, live right across the street, lovely people, okay? If I was super strict, I would have, well, they're not married, and they were living together. But this summer, they finally called, Sam walked over and said, "Hey, John, we got a favor." "Sure, what do you need?" I thought, he's not going to borrow my snowblower, it's August. And he goes, "We're going to get married. Would you officiate? We don't believe in God and stuff, right? But would you?" "Yeah, honored, So I officiated their wedding, which consisted of me and Judy and them sitting around their dining room table, passing the paperwork back and forth. And so, pretty low-key wedding. But that happened because of years of hospitality, that we had earned the right by serving each other to when something came. So New Year's Eve, they invited us over, and at one point, Tammy lets loose with, "I don't believe in God." Okay, you probably had a little too much to drink there, Tammy. But then listening, okay, so then hospitality says, I'm not going to walk out of this room because someone has just denigrated something that's really, really important to me. But you start hearing the story of the crazy aunt that dragged her to Pentecostal church that scared the devil out of her. And so the God she doesn't believe in is the same God I don't believe in. Okay? And so it was like, because we lived with hospitality towards each other, as opposed to going, "Oh yeah, that's just insane." So Jesus as exemplar. This is Jesus. That's a fancy Latin way of saying we not only look to Jesus as our Savior, we also look to him and say, "How do I do this?" If anybody had the right to look down and say, "No, I'm not going to associate with you," it was Jesus. Perfect, sinless, Son of God. And he could very easily look down on sinful humanity and go, "Not my problem." But in love, he chooses to come down and connect with sinful human beings. We read this one at Christmas time. At just the right time, while we're still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely when someone died for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly die. But God demonstrates his love. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus comes for us. He practices hospitality for us. And as a result, we get to follow him. We get to practice hospitality. Next week, I have an altogether different lesson. Hopefully my appliances keep working, both major and minor, and I will have my entire Sunday school lesson for you. I will take questions and comments in the lobby, but I got to get upstairs and greet second service. Go in peace, serve the Lord.